Contraceptive mandate. The Wall Street Journal reports the president is about to roll back an Obama-era health care rule, how it impacts employers and conscience rights. Race relations.
We need to learn from it so we don't repeat it.
Days after a white nationalist violent protest in Charlottesville, we talked to a man who has helped dozens of KKK members get out of the Klan. Democracy under threat.
People united will never be defeated.
Student leaders of a massive protest in Hong Kong learned their fate in court, one of whom pleaded his case here on News Nightly. And waves of hope, one surfing school's mission to help children with disabilities. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 17th, 2017. A van jumps the sidewalk and crashes in Barcelona's historic Las Ramblas district. Thank you for joining us this evening for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. ISIS has claimed responsibility for yet another terror attack. At least 12 people are dead, 80 others hospitalized. Police say at least 2 suspects have been arrested. Las Ramblas cuts through the center of Barcelona and is one of the city's top tourist destinations. The Vatican says Pope Francis is praying for those victims. The White House says President Trump has been briefed and is getting updates. The Trump administration is about to roll back a mandate in Obamacare that requires employers to provide contraceptive coverage to employees. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The Wall Street Journal article references the HHS mandate imposed by the Obama administration. It forces religious nonprofits to provide birth control, abortion-inducing drugs, and sterilization in their health coverage. The report says, quote, federal health officials are expected to finalize a regulation that would allow employers with religious or moral objections to birth control to admit coverage for contraception from their workers' plans. That's according to 2 people familiar with its contents. The report goes on to say the final regulation closely mirrors an earlier leaked draft of HHS mandate revisions. Hillary Burns, Assistant General Counsel at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, is quoted in the article. She spoke with us. She says a rollback would go a very long way to restoring religious freedom and conscience rights, but Burns says the administration needs to take action quickly.
We would love to see something issued soon because we've been waiting a really long time for something to come forth from this administration to solve this crisis of the HHS mandate that's been going on for over 6 years now. What we're hoping is for a broad religious and moral exemption for anyone who has moral or religious objections to covering these drugs and devices, some of which can cause an early abortion.
We asked the White House to confirm the Journal report. A White House spokesman would not give us an update. All he would say is White House press doesn't want to get ahead of any announcements from the administration. Lauren.
And EWTN also was involved in the suit against the administration. Mark, the Wall Street Journal says the final regulation will mirror that leaked draft of the HHS revisions. What can you tell us about that draft?
If the new rule resembles the draft, it could be a good sign for the protection of conscience rights. Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore, he's the chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Committee for Religious Liberty, says the leaked regulations would provide encouraging news and would broaden the range of groups who would be exempted from that mandate. Lauren.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. The White House has an interim White House communications director. Hope Hicks was one of the first people to join the Trump campaign team and previously worked with Ivanka Trump's fashion line. Hicks accompanied the Trumps to the Vatican to meet Pope Francis in May. She fills the role Anthony Scaramucci left vacant after he was pushed out after a brief and controversial tenure. The president's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, talks to a liberal publication about a wide range of topics and is catching some heat for it. Bannon said there's no military solution to the threat posed by North Korea. He also dismissed the white supremacist movement by calling them losers. The White House has not responded to requests for comment on that interview. Hundreds gather at the University of Virginia for a candlelight vigil in Charlottesville. I'll be buried in my grave. Marchers assembled peacefully in the same place where hundreds of white nationalists marched on Friday, followed by clashes between rally attendees and those protesting them on Saturday. One woman had died. 2 state troopers died when a helicopter monitoring the rally crashed. In a series of tweets this morning, President Trump spoke out about the removal of Confederate icons amid the Charlottesville violence. He writes, "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. Can't change history, but you can learn from it," he continues. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, who's next? Washington, Jefferson, so foolish. Also, the beauty that is being taken out of our cities, towns, and parks, he continues, will be greatly missed and never able to be comparably replaced. As the country picks up the pieces after violent white nationalist protests in Charlottesville, many Americans are asking themselves, is there anything I can do to stop racism and hate? Jason Calvey's in the house. He spoke with a Maryland man who is conquering hate with friendship. Tell us about that, Jason.
Right, Lauren. His name is Daryl Davis, and he's an African-American pianist who jammed with Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and others. He says by becoming friends with members of the KKK, he has helped them leave that white supremacist group. He tells me conversation can spark conversion.
You've led, what, a dozen Klansmen out of the Klan?
A lot more than that.
A lot more. How do you do it?
Conversation. You know, I'll give you an example of something. I was in my car one time with a Klansman, and he was talking about, which I've heard before, it's Klan ideology, that every black person has a gene within them that makes them violent. I'm as black as anybody you've ever seen. I have never done a carjacking or a drive-by. How do you explain that? He didn't even hesitate. He answered me like that. He said, your gene is latent. It hasn't come out yet. How do you argue with somebody that far gone? And I thought about it. So I said, well, you know, we all know that all white people have a gene within them that makes them a serial killer. And he says, well, how do you figure? I said, name me 3 black serial killers. He couldn't do it. I rattled off Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, Henry Lee Lucas, John Wayne Gacy. I said, you see, son, you're a serial killer. He says, Daryl, I've never killed anybody. I said, your gene is latent, hasn't come out yet. He goes, well, that's stupid. I said, well, duh. But yes, it is stupid. But it's no more stupid for me to say that about you than what you said about me. 5 months later, this guy who was an officer in the Klan quit the Klan, and I have his Robin Hood, and that was the first Robin Hood that I ever got. This is the robe of a Klan leader. This is an Imperial Wizard robe, okay? A national Klan leader.
No way.
Right there, okay? Here is the hood, okay? I did not get this just by getting on TV and saying, you know, racism is bad. You know, get out of it and mail me your Robin Hood. No, I sat down and talked with these people. Dialogue. That's what it takes. The little trivial things that you have in contrast, like skin color, don't matter anymore. And so you nurture those commonalities, and then you're starting to form a relationship. Okay? You may be disagreeing, but you're forming a relationship. And then when you nurture that relationship, you begin to form a friendship. And next thing you know, each other sees each other as a human being. And that's what we need.
Mr. Davis tells me he's hopeful the white supremacists who marched in Charlottesville can turn away from racism. Lauren?
Jason, how did it feel talking to this guy?
It was an amazing story. I mean, he has the robes and the hoods to prove that conversation really can lead to conversion.
Amazing, amazing story. Thank you, Jason Calvey reporting. Crews off of the shore of Hawaii search for 5 soldiers aboard an Army helicopter that crashed during nighttime training exercises. A fuselage and helmet have been found so far. 2 Black Hawk crews were training when one lost contact with the other. 2 pilots and 3 crew members were on board. The U.S. Army owns 2,300 of these Black Hawk helicopters. There are only 3,000 in service around the world. The American and Japanese defense chiefs and top diplomats meet in Washington to discuss security and the threat from North Korea. It comes amid mixed messages from the Trump administration on how to deal with the rogue nation's nuclear and missile testing. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson have been hosting their Japanese counterparts here at the State Department. Japan remains a key military ally for the U.S., but it's also a potential target of North Korean aggression. Secretaries Mattis and Tillerson made it clear today they stand with the Japanese foreign and defense ministers. This is an annual event. Every year, Japan and the U.S. meet to address military and security issues, but this year's meeting comes just days after North Korea threatened to launch missiles at the Pacific island of Guam, a U.S. territory. Tillerson did not directly address the comment by White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, who says there is no military solution in North Korea. However, both secretaries say a military option is still on the table.
I can just assure you that in close collaboration with our allies, there are strong military consequences if DPRK initiates hostilities.
A threat of proportions that none of us like to contemplate has to be backed by a strong military consequence if North Korea chooses wrongly.
This week, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un backed off his missile threats, but he says North Korea would attack if the U.S. persists in, quote, reckless action on the Korean peninsula. This week, 3,500 American and Japanese troops held joint drills in Japan. Officials say that this is not in response to any threats from North Korea. The U.S. and Japan have been coordinating exercises for years. In addition to meeting here at the State Department, the new U.S. ambassador to Japan arrived in Tokyo today. William Haggerty says his goal is to strengthen the U.S. alliance with Japan. He says he expects their relationship to become even stronger in the face of the rising threat in the region. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. South Korea's president is marking 100 days in office with a rather sweeping promise to his country.
한반도에서 두 번 다시 전쟁은 없을 것이라고 제가 자신 있게
Moon Jaein, South Korean president, I can confidently say there will not be a war again on the Korean peninsula. Moon Jae-in says he is confident there would never be a war. His remarks come as the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chief of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, is traveling through Asia, reassuring allies concerned about tensions between the U.S. and North Korea.
Umbrella Movement is the movement we organized 3 years ago with civil disobedience to fight for democracy.
That was Joshua Wong on our show back in May. Today, Wong and two other student leaders are in prison in Hong Kong. The three are serving up to 8 months in jail for their roles in pro-democracy protests nearly 3 years ago. After the verdict was read, Wong tweeted, "We will not give up." Vietnam is criticizing the U.S. State Department's annual International Religious Freedom Report, saying it contains false information. The report says the Vietnamese Communist government harasses religious leaders and limits the number of groups allowed to operate in the country. A spokeswoman for the country says the government respects freedom of religion and belief. Out of 93 million people, 7% are Catholic. More than 600 refugees have been saved in the last 24 hours in Spain. The country's Maritime Rescue Service says it was one of the busiest days so far this year. The migrants were trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea from Morocco. And so far, more than 9,000 migrants this year and refugees have reached Spain by sea. Most residents of Rome and the Vatican are out of here. They're on vacation this month due to that summer heat, but not Pope Francis.
Il tempo estivo è un momento provvidenziale per accrescere.
Earlier this month at a Sunday Angelus, the Holy Father reminded us that summer is a time to grow in our faith and encounter our Lord. Father John Walk, a professor of literature at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome, joins us now. Welcome to the program, Father.
Thanks for having me.
We know that the Pope suspends his weekly papal audiences in July and his daily Mass for Vatican employees. Can you tell us how Pope Francis spends his time when Rome and the Vatican are so quiet?
Well, it's true that Rome these days is a bit like Wall Street on the weekend. Lots of empty streets, easy parking, no place to eat. It's a strange time here in Rome. No one knows exactly how the Pope is using these days. It's easier to say what he's not doing, I think. He's not spending the day, watching movies or surfing the internet. He says that this time of year is when he takes his vacation, which means he prays more, he reads books that he feels like reading, listens to music. That's his way of relaxing. Now, of course, that's not the only thing that he's doing.
Of course not. But you know, you've been in Rome for many years, and you know the Holy Father's decision not to go to the papal summer residence in Castel Gandolfo, which I have been to and have seen Pope John Paul II there over a very hot summer. And this is a departure from tradition. How is this seen by people in and around the Vatican?
Well, I think people in some ways admire the Pope's work ethic. In fact, we know that he is working now. I'm sure he's preparing speeches for his trip to Colombia at the beginning of September. I know that one of his close collaborators, Victor Fernandez, Bishop Fernandez from Buenos Aires, is here and has met with him at the Casa Santa Marta. So he's also seeing people and conducting, you could say, private, work. But the decision not to go to Castel Gandolfo for the summer probably has had most effect not here in Rome, but in Castel Gandolfo itself. The presence of the Pope in Castel Gandolfo was really what made that city famous. It's what put it on the map. And from an economic point of view, the city depends largely on tourism. And so there's been a big slowdown in the economy in that tiny, beautiful little town. But when the Pope isn't there, there's less incentive for other people to go there.
Of course. Well, Father, I hope that you get the opportunity to enjoy your vacation and get some downtime. I think we all need that. Father John Walk, professor at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, protests in Kenya after a nationwide election. A Kenyan professor goes in depth about the country's political climate. Plus, achieving God's goodness and mercy, the Holy Father's tips for achieving it. May nothing stop you from living and growing in your Heavenly Father's friendship and from witnessing to His infinite goodness and mercy. That was a tweet sent this morning from Pope Francis. Kenya's opposition leader, Raila Odinga, will challenge the results of last week's presidential election.
You have now decided to move to the Supreme Court and lay before the world the making of...
Odinga made the announcement on Wednesday. Riots erupted soon after voting began on August 8th when the winner, Uhuru Kenyatta's main challenger, Raila Odinga, alleged vote rigging. Our next guest can give us the insight into the political climate in Kenya, where he voted in the Kenya presidential election. Joining us now is George Jenga, a senior lecturer on ethics and leadership at Kenya's Strathmore University. And you're Kenyan, but you're joining us via Skype from Uganda. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Glad
to be there.
I'm glad to have you. President Uhuru Kenyatta received 54% of the vote. He defeated his opponent, Raila Odinga. Now, Odinga says, hey, not good. I'm going to dispute the results of this election. Do you think the election was fair?
I think I cannot answer that question directly right now because there is a court case in the Supreme Court challenging the efficacy of the electoral process.
But I read that this is the most fair election in Kenya. That was in the Wall Street Journal. Can you briefly describe the political climate up until this point?
The electoral process seemed fair. All the observer bodies have given it a clean bill of health. The key issues that were being voted in this time were, of course, the new constitution and implementation of a better devolution of funds to the counties, that is the sub-governments of the main government. They were fighting for a change in the community leading the country.
Catholics, I understand, represent 23% of the population, but the most important statistic here is that 75% are Christian out of the 47 million people. Do religious issues impact elections in Kenya?
Not significantly. We are a bit of a chameleon people. We normally take the nature of the religious people, of the religion of the people we want to vote for us. So even though I may be Christian, if I go to the Muslim background, I'll have to espouse my ideas from their perspective rather than against them. And therefore, there's general peace and less religious warfare. In general, in Kenya, we have very little religious warfare.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for shedding light onto Kenya and its electoral process. George Jenga, a senior lecturer on ethics and leadership at Kenya's Strathmore University.
Thank you very much.
Up next, the shocking number of car crashes in the U.S. and how they're related to the opioid crisis. And Hanging 10, how a group is helping children with disabilities catch a wave of hope. It's the feast day of St. Joan of the Cross. Born in 1666 in France, she dedicated her life to the poor and elderly. Over the course of her 70 years here on Earth, she founded 12 religious houses, hospices, and schools. Those behind the wheel overdosing on heroin and other drugs are driving up the number of car crashes in the U.S. In 2015, more than 7,000 deaths can be connected to drug-related crashes. Opioids have become so powerful in recent years that more police officers are having to administer multiple doses of an opioid antidote. Officers say people with addictions often inject as soon as they get into their car after buying drugs. And a new report by UNICEF says the U.S. has the 7th highest rate of child poverty in economically developed countries. WalletHub is a personal finance website, and it believes the issue of underprivileged children takes a big toll economically on the country, and financially, and emotionally. And they've released a new study, 2017's states with the most underprivileged children. We're joined now by Jill Gonzalez, who's an analyst for WalletHub. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
This is a fascinating study. You compared all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and you took 21 metrics of neediness. How did you measure all of this? And we'll get to the states in just a second.
Sure. So we actually looked at 3 different categories. Those 21 metrics were in each one of those. One was the socioeconomic welfare of children, also children's health care, and finally children's education. So we looked at that and saw how it differs, and it does differ vastly.
Well, let's take a look. I've seen these numbers. Here's the worst. Mississippi, District of Columbia, Nevada, the best states for handling poor children. New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Tell me, what can those worst states learn from the best states?
So I don't think that it's a coincidence that a lot of these best states, year after year, are getting high marks in education. They're seeing some of the highest, or the lowest dropout rates, I should say, among the country, and that even stands up for economically disadvantaged children.
Interesting. I want to show our viewers this graph of the best and worst states with the highest food insecurity rates. Take a look here. If you look at this, it says Mississippi, Arkansas, New Mexico, Alabama, Arizona have the highest food insecurity rates. What does that really mean?
So a food insecurity rate generally means that each child is not sure when their next meal is coming, when it is coming from. So that's really what we're looking at here, and it's 3 times higher in Mississippi than, say, in New Jersey or Connecticut.
Let's go into Medicaid, because here in Washington, the health care bill is still in limbo. If they decide to cut Medicaid, how is that going to impact these children?
So right now, 1/4 of the U.S. population is made up of children, but half of Medicaid's population are children. So obviously, because they're the largest group who qualifies, they'll be affected the most. So that's definitely scary.
Okay, Jill Gonzalez, analyst for WalletHub. Thank you for talking about this very important study.
Anytime.
Every pregnant woman in Iceland is given an option of a prenatal test that can detect Down syndrome with 85% accuracy. A CBS News report finds nearly 100% of pregnancies that tested positive are being aborted in Iceland. Here in the U.S., according to the study by the NIH, it's closer to 70%. But there is one group in Chile celebrating children with Downs.
Apoyarlos, entregarles algo nuevo, y se hace todo muy armonioso, muy bonito.
Olas de Esperanza, or Waves of Hope, is based in northern Chile and helps children and young adults with disabilities Hang 10. The program was launched 5 years ago, and each Sunday from December to February, more than a dozen children with Down syndrome, Asperger's, and autism enjoy surfing in the water. And organizers say the children capture their hearts and have changed the way volunteers look at life. We want to hear your personal stories about a loved one or loved ones with Down syndrome and the joy they bring to your life. Head to facebook.com/EWTN News Nightly and join the conversation. We'll share some of your stories here on the broadcast. And one of my playmates, just on a personal note, when I was a small girl, had Downs. His name was Jackie. I didn't see him after 6 years old, so he died. I loved him so much, but now my son's name is Jack. That does it for us. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow. Good night and God bless.